At exactly 3:24 in the morning, the security camera in the narrow hallway clicked into infrared mode, casting a ghostly gray glow over the silent space. On the glowing screen, a large silver tabby cat was dragging a heavy wool sweater across the hardwood floor. He did not carry it to his warm bed, nor did he treat it like a toy. He dragged it straight into the dark bathroom, dropping the fabric directly into his overflowing ceramic water bowl until it was completely saturated. Then, with tremendous physical effort, he pulled the dripping, heavy mass out of the water and dragged it across the floor to the front door of the apartment. Using his front paws, he meticulously wedged the wet wool into the narrow gap between the bottom of the front door and the floorboards. Once the gap was entirely sealed, the cat sat back on his haunches, stared unblinkingly at the locked door, and let out a guttural, desperate wail. It was not a normal cry for food, nor a casual demand for human attention. It was a chilling sound of absolute panic. And the terrifying detail that made the apartment owner's blood run completely cold was that the gray sweater belonged to a man who had died in a tragic accident 2 years ago. Maya Lin was 29 years old, living a quiet, isolated life as a freelance video editor in a second-floor apartment in rainy Seattle. The old brick building was drafty, quiet, and profoundly lonely, which perfectly matched her internal emotional state. 2 years prior, she had lost her fiancé, David, a brave and dedicated city firefighter, in a sudden highway collision. Since that devastating day, Maya had struggled with severe insomnia, anxiety, and crushing grief, relying on heavy prescription sleep medication just to get a few uninterrupted hours of rest each night. Her only remaining companion was Silas, a massive silver tabby cat with piercing green eyes. Silas had originally been David's cat, and he was typically a creature of extreme laziness and comfort. During the day, Silas did nothing but sleep in the warmest sunbeams, meticulously groom his thick fur, and purr softly when Maya scratched behind his ears. He was a deeply peaceful animal, completely uninterested in playing with toys or causing any destruction. For 2 long years, Silas had been Maya's quiet, grounding anchor in a world that felt entirely unpredictable. He had never destroyed a single piece of furniture, and he had certainly never touched David's old clothes, which Maya kept carefully folded on the bottom shelf of her bedroom closet. That was exactly why his sudden, frantic nighttime behavior was so deeply unsettling. The bizarre behavior did not stop after that first strange night. Instead, it escalated rapidly. On the second night, Maya woke up to find another of David's expensive sweaters soaking wet and wedged tightly under the front door. She assumed Silas had accidentally knocked it into the water bowl while playing and dragged it in a panic. But on the third night, the security camera captured the exact same deliberate, calculated routine. Always at exactly 3:24 in the morning, Silas would somehow open the closet door with his paw, pull out a specific piece of David's thick clothing, soak it entirely, barricade the door gap, and howl into the darkness. By the fourth night, Silas's reaction became highly aggressive. When Maya tried to pull the wet, ruined sweater away from the door the next morning, Silas swiped at her hand, hissing violently. He planted his paws firmly on the wet fabric, fiercely refusing to let her remove it. Meanwhile, Maya's own physical health was mysteriously deteriorating. She started waking up with splitting, blinding headaches, extreme morning dizziness, and a heavy, suffocating feeling in her chest. She blamed these terrible symptoms on the stress of the cat's bizarre behavior and the side effects of her heavy sleeping pills. She was exhausted, terrified that Silas was losing his mind, and completely unaware that her own life was hanging by a very thin thread. Desperate for answers and running out of patience, Maya tried everything to stop the nightly destruction. Her first logical hypothesis was that Silas was experiencing severe separation anxiety, acting out because the specific clothes still carried a faint scent of David. She bought expensive puzzle toys and calming pheromone plugins, hoping to soothe his frayed nerves. Silas ignored them completely. Next, she assumed he was suffering from a urinary tract infection or cognitive decline, causing him to behave erratically with his water source. She packed him into his carrier and drove him to the local veterinarian. The doctor ran a full blood panel, a urinalysis, and a neurological exam. The results clearly showed that Silas was in perfect physical condition. He was a completely healthy, highly intelligent cat. Following the vet's advice, Maya tried locking her bedroom closet with a child-proof latch to protect the remaining clothes. She even moved his water bowl into the bathtub so he could not easily drag fabrics into it, but Silas simply adapted with shocking determination. That very night, he used his teeth to pull a heavy cotton bath towel off the rack, soaked it in the leftover water at the bottom of the tub, and dragged it to the front door. He was absolutely determined to seal that specific door gap, no matter what obstacles Maya put in his way. On the 7th night, Maya decided to skip her heavy sleeping medication. She sat quietly in the dark living room, wrapping a thick blanket around her shoulders, waiting to catch Silas in the act. At exactly 3:24 in the morning, the floorboards creaked. Silas walked past her, soaked a towel, and wedged it beneath the door just as he always did. But this time, observing him in person, Maya noticed a chilling detail she had missed on the camera. Silas was not just blocking the door. He was violently sniffing the tiny stream of air coming from the hallway, and his green eyes were watering profusely. Before we uncover the terrifying truth behind this cat's desperate actions, if you enjoy emotional and mysterious stories like this, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these beautiful tales. The next morning, Maya's headache was the absolute worst it had ever been. Her vision blurred uncomfortably as she walked down the hallway to check the other side of her apartment door. She knelt down and smelled the carpet right outside her unit. There was a faint, strange, metallic chemical odor hanging heavily in the stagnant air of the corridor. Seeking an explanation, she carefully walked downstairs to speak to her landlord. The first floor of the building, a long-abandoned vintage diner, was finally being renovated for a new tenant. The landlord casually mentioned that the construction crew had brought in massive industrial, gas-powered concrete heaters, setting them on timers to run overnight to quickly dry the newly poured foundation. Maya's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She remembered reading once that commercial gas heaters operating in unventilated, enclosed spaces were incredibly dangerous. Her daily headaches, her severe dizziness, her morning nausea, they were not symptoms of psychological stress or lack of sleep. To confirm her terrifying, growing suspicion, Maya immediately drove to the local hardware store and purchased a highly sensitive digital air quality and carbon monoxide monitor. That evening, she placed the small plastic device on the floor, directly next to her front door, right in the exact spot where Silas always wedged the wet fabrics. She sat rigidly on the couch, her hands trembling in her lap, waiting for the clock to strike 3 in the morning. At exactly 3:24 in the morning, the digital monitor on the floor lit up with a blinding, flashing red light. A piercing, high-pitched alarm shattered the fragile silence of the apartment. The screen displayed a toxic, rapidly rising level of deadly carbon monoxide gas. Downstairs, the construction crew's automated electrical timer had just kicked on the industrial gas heaters. The exhaust pipe on the old building's chimney was completely faulty, pumping deadly, odorless carbon monoxide directly into the building's central ventilation shaft, which leaked heavily into Maya's second-floor hallway. The toxic, invisible draft was creeping rapidly under Maya's front door every single night. Silas had not been destroying clothes out of grief, boredom, or anxiety. His highly sensitive feline nose had detected the poisonous gas entering their home long before human senses ever could. He was using the heavy, wet wool to create a literal airtight seal along the bottom of the door, physically blocking the toxic air from filling the apartment, while Maya lay completely unconscious under the heavy influence of her sleeping pills. But while the monitor clearly explained the severe danger, it did not explain the specific method. How could a simple house cat possibly know that a wet fabric was the exact right tool to block a toxic draft? As the digital alarm continued to blare its terrifying warning, Maya stared down at Silas, who was frantically pulling a fresh towel toward the door to protect her. And then, a memory from 4 years ago hit her with the devastating, breathless force of a physical blow. She and David had been living in their very first tiny apartment across town. Late one night, a massive grease fire had broken out in the kitchen of the unit right next door to theirs. Their hallway had instantly filled with thick, suffocating, pitch-black smoke. Maya had been completely paralyzed by terror. But David, leaning on his extensive, rigorous training as a career firefighter, had remained perfectly calm and focused. He had immediately grabbed his heavy winter wool sweater from the chair, soaked it completely under the running bathroom faucet, and shoved it tightly into the gap under their front door. He had held Maya tightly and explained that wet wool was the absolute best temporary filter to block toxic smoke and dangerous chemical gases from seeping into a room while they waited for the rescue crews to arrive. Silas had been sitting quietly on the bed that night, watching David's every single move with wide, observant eyes. Maya fell to her knees on the cold hardwood floor, hot tears streaming down her face. Silas was not acting on random animal instinct. He was actively remembering. He had watched the man he loved save their lives 4 years ago. And now, with David gone and Maya left entirely vulnerable, this incredible, loyal animal had stepped directly into his late owner's shoes. Silas was executing a trained firefighter's emergency protocol, deliberately using David's own clothes, desperately trying to protect Maya in the exact same way David had protected them both. The carbon monoxide alarm beeped aggressively, a stark, ringing reminder of the immediate, deadly danger. Maya did not freeze this time. The profound realization of what Silas had been doing filled her with a sudden, fierce surge of adrenaline and absolute clarity. She reached down and grabbed Silas, clutching his warm body tightly to her chest, grabbed her cell phone, and ran out onto the exterior fire escape balcony, breathing in deep lungfuls of the cold, fresh Seattle rain. She immediately dialed emergency services. Within 10 minutes, bright red fire trucks surrounded the old brick building, their sirens cutting through the night. Firefighters breached the downstairs diner with heavy axes and immediately shut off the leaking, illegal industrial heaters. The fire chief walked up the metal stairs to Maya's balcony, his face pale and deadly serious. He looked her directly in the eye and told her that the carbon monoxide levels in her hallway were high enough to be completely lethal. If she had been deeply asleep on her medication, and if that door gap had not been meticulously sealed by thick, wet fabric every single night, she absolutely would not have woken up this morning. Silas had not just been warning her. He had been actively, physically keeping her alive for over a week. Standing in the freezing rain, Maya buried her face in Silas's wet silver fur, holding him closer than ever before, making a silent, tearful promise that she would never take another day of her life for granted. 3 months later, the gloomy, rainy season finally gave way to a bright, clear, and hopeful spring. Maya's life looked entirely different now. She had immediately broken her lease and moved out of the drafty old building, finding a beautiful, sunlit apartment on the ground floor of a much safer neighborhood. More importantly, she had thrown away her heavy prescription sleeping pills for good. The terrifying realization of how close she had come to quietly dying in her sleep pushed her to finally seek proper, professional grief counseling. She was finally learning to process her profound loss, finding healthier, natural ways to sleep, to heal, and to live her life again. Silas changed dramatically too. The very moment they moved into the new, completely safe apartment, his frantic, obsessive nighttime behavior completely vanished. He never dragged another piece of clothing to the door. He never howled in the middle of the night again. He returned completely to being the lazy, peaceful silver tabby he was always meant to be. He spent his long afternoons stretched out fully in the warm sunbeams that pooled on the living room rug, his loud, rhythmic purr filling the quiet, safe spaces of the apartment. His stressful watch was over. He knew, without a single doubt, that his human was finally safe. One quiet, peaceful evening, Maya sat on her living room floor, slowly going through a cardboard box of David's old belongings. She reached to the very bottom and pulled out the gray wool sweater Silas had used on that terrifying first night. It was slightly warped, stiff, and permanently stained from the water damage. no longer the perfect garment it once was. But instead of crying over the painful memory of what she had lost, Maya looked at the fabric and smiled warmly. She carefully folded the ruined sweater and placed it gently at the bottom of Silas's new plush cat bed in the corner of the room. Silas walked over immediately, sniffed the familiar, comforting fabric, circled exactly twice, and curled up into a perfect silver ball right on top of it, closing his green eyes. Maya sat beside him on the floor, resting her hand gently on his warm rising back. She looked around her bright, safe home and realized a beautiful truth. David had never really left them unprotected. He had left a profound piece of his bravery, his critical knowledge, and his deep, enduring love safely stored inside the heart of a rescue cat. The apartment was no longer a place of heavy grief. It was a sanctuary of survival, protected by a love that refused to fade. Sometimes, true love does not end when a person fades away. It simply changes form, echoing quietly through the perfect memory of a faithful animal, proving that those who truly care for us will always find a way to keep us safe in the dark.